Okay, I think it's very important that I give the setting of this experience so that people can understand. I don't just get visions from God just to be getting visions. This is not a haphazard thing. It was at a very dear cost to my life. And expense of the time away from my family, of leaving before Thanksgiving here in the United States and being gone into January, walking and praying around the country of Wales. I was in the smaller little town prior to Carnarvon, Northern Wales. Carnarvon, Northern Wales is where Charles was coronated as the Prince of Wales. It was in the 11th century the largest marine land-based defense center of the British Empire. And I was walking Bangor, Bangor, Wales, the first little town before Carnarvon. You notice we have a Bangor nuclear submarine base out from Washington. But I was walking the little town of Bangor, Northern Wales, and it was very cold. It was snowing. The creek was frozen. I was systematically walking every street of that village, which I had been doing, working on 7 years of walking around the country of Wales. And the Lord spoke to me after I had tried to take a shortcut across the creek to continue walking the next street instead of going down to the bridge, coming back and walking that street. Took a shortcut across the creek carefully on the ice, but fell through the ice. Was just wet up to my knees, but that put my shoes wet and my pant legs wet up to my knees. And my pant legs froze in no time. It was that cold. My feet were freezing. And I was away from home during some of the most special time of the family, and cold and miserable. And the Lord asked me this question: Henry, are you willing to lay your wife and your children on the altar and never see them again this side of heaven? And I couldn't answer the Lord. And I said, Lord, I can't say yes because I'm fearful that I would be offended at you. And you said, blessed are those that are not offended at me. And I love you too much, but I can't answer that right now. And I finished walking the town of Bangor, Wales, got on the transport, went to the visitor center in Carnarvon, got me a room assigned, and headed up to the room, left off my backpack in the room that I rented, and came back down, got myself some fish and chips, and was walking back toward my room, eating those nice hot chips, as French fries, we call them here, and saw a group of young people standing outside of a building, and they were talking and laughing. And it reminded me of my teenagers at home, and I just lost my appetite, thinking I may never see them again this side of heaven if I say yes. And I threw my fish and chips in what they call the dustbin or the garbage can, went back to the room, took as hot a shower as I could to warm up my body, crawled into bed, woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, got out on my knees to pray, and the Lord spoke to me again. I was not talking to the Lord in that time. I didn't want to talk to Him. I didn't want to say yes. And the Lord spoke to me and said, I want your answer before you leave the room this morning. I broke into tears, crying so loud I buried my face in the pillow, afraid I'd be waking people in rooms around me, crying and saying, Lord, I'm so sorry, but I want to say yes, but I'm afraid if I say yes and you take my family, that I will be offended at you. And I love you and I love my family. I love you more, but I can't say I won't be offended at you. And the Lord began showing me my life and raising my wife and I and 13 children. He began showing me all the times that He had intervened on our behalf. One of our children was born dead. Another one got his eye knocked out. God put a brand new eye in. He raised the one that was born dead. I had 6 of them at home. And he raised him from the dead right inside with me, holding him in my hands. His body was black with death. Things like that. And he raised me from the dead in 1984 in an automobile accident where witnesses said I had no vital signs for a minimum of 27 minutes. He showed me this and many things more and asked me each time, could you have done that for yourself? Well, I assure you, then my tears changed from tears of fearfulness to say yes to tears of repentance for being afraid to trust him. And I repented of that, and I said, okay, Lord, I give them to you. I believe that was a foundation where God was testing me to see if he could entrust to me what he was going to show me. I had received at the visitor center a map of the city of Carnarvon. My normal procedure was to go down to the bay or down to a river or lake, whichever is the lowest point at that village or city, and touch my feet in the water, and then systematically walk every street to the highest point, and then pray over the village or city from the highest point, lifting my hands and praying and declaring whatever the Lord asked me to pray or declare. And as I was walking down toward the bay, I came by the gate to the Carnarvon Castle. And the Lord said, go in and go to the highest tower. I didn't know what that was. So I went in, paid my fee for not taking a tour, just to walk around. That's where I found where Charles was coronated as the Prince of Wales. And I asked, which is the tallest tower, and may I get to the top of it? Oh, absolutely. And so they told me there's a little war museum at the bottom. You go through that, and you'll go through a spiral of stairs, and you go all the way to the top. It's permissible to go there. So I went up there, and I thought it was very interesting in that museum. I thought it was interesting. There was a letter from the Admiral in the service of His Majesty, stating of this small uprising in the colonies, and it said, in parentheses, it said what became the United States of America. He wrote the letter to His Majesty saying, I will settle this small uprising in a fortnight, which would be 2 weeks, and be setting sail back to my Majesty's service. Well, another note was underneath it saying this was the War of Independence, and obviously he didn't make it back in a fortnight. Well, I kind of chuckled over that and thought, yes, there right there in this tower is a museum showing the foundation of America, becoming a nation. And I never thought anything about that. I was just thinking that's a nice, and I did take pictures of the letter and all that, and his uniform and everything they had there, and I prized that. But I headed on up the tower, and I got to the top of the tower. I looked off from Carnarvon, and I saw the island of Anglesey out. And so my mind was entirely involved in asking the Lord, do you want me to walk the island of Anglesey? It's not that big of an island. Or go on to the next town. And as I asked him that, all of a sudden, I was caught up into the heavens, looking down on the earth like a globe. And I saw a massive military movement coming out from what I didn't know where it was. It was way up by the Arctic, toward, I knew, Greenland, up that way, and Norway, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, up above, way up there. A massive military movement of Navy ships coming out, submarines, aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers and all. And I saw them coming out, and then all of a sudden I looked across the United States, across the Atlantic to the United States, and I saw this submarine on the bottom of the floor of the sea, and it was so close toward New York City and that area that the light color of the sand was still out in its nose. It was that close. The light sand had lightened up the floor of the ocean there. And here was that submarine sitting there. And then, all of a sudden, I thought, oh my word. And I looked across the United States, because my family at that time was living in Portland, Oregon. And I saw submarines poised over there. I looked around, and I saw them poised down by California, around toward all the way from San Francisco to San Diego. I looked across the continent, and I saw in Florida. I saw them poised near in the Gulf of Mexico and over on the Atlantic side, just sitting there under the water. And then when I looked back across the up toward New York, looking back at that one that I first saw, something caught my eye. All of a sudden, all of these radio towers, I thought they were radio towers, began springing up all across the United States, thousands of them, which now I know to be cell phone towers. There was not one cell phone tower at that time. This was December the 14th, 1986. And all of these cell phone towers spring up out of the earth, and I watched it, the dotted line, like they were transmitting, like you'd see with a radio station. And all of a sudden, I saw the signals of every one of those towers just sprinkled to the dust, like they were trying to transmit, but they were just sprinkling to the dust. And then I saw this missile come. I looked back toward New York City. I saw this missile come out of that submarine, go up over New York City, and explode. And I watched New York City disintegrate right before my eyes. Because my family lived across in Portland, Oregon, I looked across the United States. I saw an explosion up toward the area of Seattle, Bellevue, and a massive explosion there. I saw another one down by San Francisco, and two more, one down kind of below that, and then one towards San Diego. Then I saw another one explode between Miami and Tampa, Florida. And I cried out in the heavens, "Oh Lord, oh Lord, they won't even know what hit them." The radio broadcast sprinkled to the ground. They won't even know what hit them. As I cried out, this alarm went off in me as I saw this first missile go up. They won't even know. They won't broadcast. The people won't even know what hit them. And then all of a sudden, after I saw all these hitting, I was back down on the tower there in Carnarvon, looking out over the island of Anglesey, thinking about what I had just seen, and I thought it had literally happened at that instant. So then I looked off to the right, and there literally were British warships in the port there at Carnarvon, and there were no alarms going off, no lights flashing, no one hurrying to the ports to get onto those warships. I turned and looked off the tower to the left down into the city of Carnarvon. There were no alarms, no sirens going off, business as usual that morning, probably about 9:30. And I thought, well, Lord, if this was really happening now, then there would be alarms here. They would know. And so I looked up and I said, Father in heaven, if this is not happening now, what will be the sign of its time? And the sign and of its time. He said to me these words. He said, I'll never forget them. He said, when Russia opens her doors and lets the masses go, the free world will occupy themselves with transporting, housing, caring for the masses, will begin crying peace and safety, letting down their weapons. And that's when it will happen. And where are we today? Where are we with that? Think about it. Glasnost, Perestroika, Gorbachev, and Senior President Bush. On the front of Time magazine, I believe it was, sitting there side by side with the Russian general standing right behind Gorbachev, no American general standing behind Bush, and the new Russian flag of three colors, not the hammer and sickle, crossed over with the American flag. And I thought, dear Lord, that was in late of 89. Well, late 1987, after that, let's go back to that vision. I continued my walking and praying on around, and in the month of January 1987, I was questioning in my mind, how could these Russian submarines get that close to American soil and we not detect them? That many of them. I can't believe this. And it had my mind so troubled. And I was in a lady's home, Judith Fitzberg's home. She was one of the ladies, if any of you out there have ever read the book called Rees Howells' Intercessor by Rees Howells. He interceded and cried out to God during the Second World War, and God literally intervened through his people at his Bible school there in West Cross, Wales, or Swansea, Greater Swansea area, and had tremendous victories written in that book of interventions, divine interventions that took place, like the heavy fog came in, and when all our troops were pressed down onto the beachhead there, and the heavy fog came in, and Germany was just pounding them, the Russians were just pounding them, Germany was just pounding them, and that heavy fog came in, and the British went over with every kind of boat they could get and evacuated them from that Battle of Dunkirk, I believe it was. And when the fog cleared, the Germans come swooping down on that beachhead, and there were no soldiers left. They had evacuated every one of them back across the channel. And that began the downfall of Hitler. And, of course, all those troops, thousands of troops, were able to be replaced again and continue to fight. Well, that's Rees Howells. And so I was in the home explaining just what I was doing in walking and praying the country. I had been to Rees Howells Bible College the year before and had spoke there, so she had invited me to come to a home meeting. And when I'm explaining this vision, Judith Fitzberg jumps up and comes over in front of me, this elderly lady, and she says to me in her heavy British accent, I can't speak British very well, my voice is very deep tonight, but she said to me, Henry, do you know what you're saying? And I said, Judith, I know what I saw. She says, but do you know what you're saying? And I said, Judith, I know what I saw, but what are you saying? She said, have you ever seen the book written by Reverend Gardner? I says, no. What part of the United States is he from? She said, he's not United States, he's British. I says, absolutely not. She says, I have the book. And it's called, I think, The Trumpet Call to Great Britain. And she says, what you are saying, he explains in there. He explains how out of Murmansk, which is up above over from Finland and all, and up over Archangel, that area, how the massive navy of Russia comes out, and their plan, they've been the last 3 years doing strategies, doing war games out in the Atlantic and around the Horn of Africa and around the United States, doing war games with their navy. And when it looks like they're going to strike from the Atlantic, instead they turn and go in somewhere, I forget where it was in the book, and then they do war games there. And I said, no, but I would like to see that. And so she got the book and gave it to me. Obviously, I spent time reading it. And he had time with NATO and with General, oh boy, now I should have had my books here, by General, who was head of NATO at that time, American General. And
Alexander Haig? Was it Alexander Haig?
No, it was before him.
Okay.
Well, anyhow, he wrote the book, The Bear at the Back Door. In my presentation called The Russian Invasion or Globalism, the Invasions and all that, or I Saw Subs, I name his book. I name the how to get a hold of it and everything. Reverend Gardner's book, I named The Bear at the Back Door book by, oh boy, forgive me my memory here. I can't think of his name now tonight.
Was it Sir Walter Walker?
Yeah, Sir Walter David Walker. Yes, that's exactly. Thank you, Steve. Boy, your memory is good. I've pushed 70 now. I'm over 70 now, so I guess that's the reason. I don't know. But anyhow, as I read that book, I thought, oh, my words. Well, then I got into London at the end of January, into January, and was walking the street of London, and I walked by a newsstand. And here on the newsstand, front page of, I believe it was the Today newspaper of London, front page in bold print, it shows a cargo ship, Russian cargo ship, and a submarine right under it in this drawing. And it, in bold 2-inch letters of the top of the Today newspaper, it says, "Mystery Solved." And then in the subheading, it tells how the ghost ships of many years that the United States Armed Forces, Navy, has been having what they call ghost ships, and how that they are watching Russian merchant ships coming into our east and west ports to do merchandise, and all of a sudden, before it gets to the port, it makes a sharp turn going along the coast to turn into the port, and the ship seems to split off into 2 ships. And then all of a sudden, the one that split off toward the right from it disappears off the screen. They go to investigate. They can't hear any motors running or anything, and they give up. So they started calling them ghost ships. Well, off from the coast, I think it said of Newfoundland or somewhere out there, a Russian ship, merchant ship, was floundering, was having difficulty, and it was sounding the SOS. And a United States Navy ship went over to assist them, and they came and said, "Do you need assistance?" They were only going 5 knots. And they said, "No, we don't. We think we've got the problem corrected." Well, in monitoring this, they began to catch a signal taking place between an object below that ship and above it. And in it, they began to realize there was a submarine, and they were communicating in Russian with that merchant ship. And then all of a sudden, the communication stopped. And so then they began to explore more seriously when the ship would split in half coming to our coast. And sure enough, they found Russian Akula subs that carry 20 SS-20 multi-nuclear warhead missiles. We might want to call them like ICBMs. 20 of those missiles in that ship, one of the most deadly nuclear-powered subs in the Russian Navy. And it told that, and I said, that's what I saw in the vision. The submarines were sitting along our coast. They shut their engines down. And that was what I saw, and I thought, dear Lord, we are in trouble, we are in trouble. So where are we
now?
Hey,
Henry, I think it's important for people to know you've been in Japan and you were unaware, and Doug, you and I and Joe talked about this. I just need to insert this. Remember when he had this vision at Carnarvon Castle, the biggest news story a little over 3 weeks ago as far as relating to Henry's vision was the Russian Akula-class nuclear submarine that went undetected in the Gulf of Mexico for 30 days. Henry was unaware of that because he's been out of country. Now, I want people to understand, we're talking about a vision that was given to Henry Gruver so many years ago that now is relevant and pertinent because, again, Henry, I want you to share, if you would, are you allowed to share the New Orleans fisherman thing? Do you think that's okay?
Absolutely.
Now, I want people to understand this. follow the timing. When did you have your vision in Carnarvon? 86?
Yeah, December 14th, 1986.
86, and if I do my quick math, okay, that's 26 years ago. Now, probably 20, and I don't know if it's 26 days. I'm not trying to make, anything about numerology out of this, but 3 weeks ago, you've got a Russian Akula-class sub that goes virtually undetected in the Gulf of Mexico. We have a hurricane that, again, hits in the New Orleans area, actually skirted New Orleans. But now, Henry, I want you to share the story, if you would, because I think what I'm trying to tell people is this is not by chance. Henry doesn't come into this country that often. He's always out walking the place of the world. That's my description, where the Lord sends him. But notice the time we're talking about this vision on Hagman and Hagman tonight, and we've got the situation with the Russian sub going undetected, the Akula-class, multiple targeted reentry vehicle, multiple warheads, and all those missiles. And the point is Henry, now share the story, if you would, sir, with everybody about the fisherman and that story as you feel led to.
Yes, I was in New Orleans at the Marriott sharing I Saw Subs Attack America. That would have been probably back in about, I would say 1991. And I was sharing that, and the whole presentation was designed to last 2 hours and 48 minutes. We had to gear it down for that so we could do the professional presentation of it at a television station. So I was working on getting it right down to 2 hours and 48 minutes. And that would be a maximum on a large video back then, and VCS, and or VR video recorder anyhow. But I took the break from the first half and was arranging all my presentations on my table up front of the Marriott there in the grand ballroom in front of hundreds of people, and was rearranging them, and these three men came up. And this man introduced himself as a man that owns a fishing trawler. And he says, I'm a fisherman, my dad has been a fisherman, my whole family have been fishermen in this Gulf area down where the Mississippi flows into the Gulf. And I said, yeah, okay. And he says, well, I've been to radio stations, I've been to the newspaper, but they don't want my story. And I said, well, what is it? He said, I was out in the Gulf of Mexico where the Mississippi flows in. I had my permit for dropping net and fishing that area. And he said, I had just purchased and installed a brand new fish detector, electronic fish detector. And he said, I had read the manual, began to be very familiar with what's metal, what's wood, and all the terrain, what to discern between what. And he says, I'm about ready to tell them to drop the nets, to let the nets go, because he said we run nets way behind our boat, when all of a sudden I see metal down below me, and it's in the shape of the hull of a boat. And I holler, hold it, don't drop the nets. And I keep going, looking at the fish detector, and I go up and I turn around and I head back down, and it's the shape of a submarine. He said, I'm angry because I have permit for that area specifically to fish. And here is this submarine under me. So he said, I got on the Marine band calling for the Coast Guard. The captain of the Coast Guard cutter answered me back, said, what is the problem? Have you an emergency? He said, yes, I do. There is a submarine direct under me, and I have permission to net in this area, and I can't drop a net because it's down there, and I only have this area, and I'll need someone to sign off this area before I can get another area. And the Coast Guard captain said, drop your net. There are no submarines in that area. Well, first he asked his location. He gave the exact location, and he said, drop your net. There are no submarines in that area. And the fisherman said, I said to that captain, sir, I know what my fish finder is telling me. And he said, I heard laughter on that Coast Guard cutter. And the captain of the Coast Guard cutter says, a fish detector? you see a submarine? He said, it is metal and it is the shape of a submarine. He said, drop your net. There are no submarines in that area. I don't know if you're getting a signal from somewhere overriding you or what. The fisherman said, sir, if you don't come and get that thing out of here, or come and give me, sign off my territory so I can quickly go back to port and get another area signed to me, I'm going to drop anchor and I'm going to hook into that thing. Well, with that, the captain of the Coast Guard cutter said, hold your position, fishermen. We're on our way. So here they came, and the captain said, I want permission to board your boat. And he says, well, yeah, come on. He says, all right, show me your fish finder and show me what you're seeing. And he showed him. He went up it and down it, and the captain said, well, I'll be a fish finder. Never would have thought of that. You've got a good fish finder here, fella. He said, all right, give me your paperwork. I'll sign it off. He said, you go back to port. Forget what you've seen. Don't be telling people. And go get you another area signed. So he said, I took him back. He boarded his cutter. And he said, I headed for the port, what looked like toward the port. But he said, I made a curve around a little island, went around the other side, dropped anchor, and got in the dinghy with these two men that are with me here. And we ran across the island. It's not a very big island out there. And we had our binoculars, and we stayed and we watched. And he said, sir, I guarantee you, a submarine came to the surface. It had Russian insignias on it. The men that came out of it were Russians. I know they were Russians. And these two men with him said, we all saw it and we will verify it. Why won't radio stations or the paper obey us? I said, wait a minute. I have here, I think it's called Jane's Book of War or something like that. I have documentation here showing the latest information about Russian submarines. If you saw one, there's several of them here, if you saw the one that you saw there on this picture, would you know it? Absolutely. We watched it. We watched it going away. All right? It was escorted by the Coast Guard cutter. You know, in Russia, we'd probably get blown out of the water if we did that. But anyhow, we watched it. And then he said, nobody would listen to us. I says, all right. I pulled out of my briefcase these papers that had been given to me, and I began thumbing through the paper, the pictures of these submarines. Guess what one they chose? The Akula submarine. All three of them pointed at the Akula sub and said, it's that one, and that is the most powerful and deadly sub that Russia has. It can, each one of those missiles can take out 15 American cities. 20 SS-20 missiles are on those silos are on that submarine, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've looked at those.
Yeah, on the missiles, and yeah, Henry, those were, you know, obviously Akula class carries, I believe there are 5 warheads per missile, so they can take out 100. Then they updated their different class of submarine-launched ballistic missiles. They are called SLBMs. But the bottom line is, I think that the most they had was 10. And the book you're referring to is Jane's All the World's Ships.
Jane, yeah, that's right. That's right. That was what was given. So, boy, that really, that put the shuddering through me. And now here we have something that just really put the shudders to me here just before I left for Japan on August the 10th this year. It was in the Oregonian, so I think it was in the Oregonian on the 10th or the Sunday before, whichever it is, how our President, Obama, has put out an order that all of our major defense military is to move to the West Coast. Fort Lewis is now going to be renamed another name, and I've been in that area since then, since I come back from Japan, and real estate is selling like hotcakes around there because they're saying that Fort Lewis and Air Force Base there is going to be massive now. And then he ordered them to build up the East Coast bases, leaving, and the article said, leaving the middle of the United States virtually defenseless because we want to beef up our defense system for America. Well, if what happens, what I saw in that vision, they would have first strike advantage. There goes our defense mechanism, East Coast, West Coast, before we can even get an anti-missile system in the air. We are vulnerable. We are sitting ducks. This is very, very, very serious.